Hello, this is Fiasco, and we're playing Ultimate General Civil War as the Confederates. This is our first phase of the Shiloh battle, and here's the overall battlefield. Our first corps, 18 units, rough numeric parity, and let's get going. So the Union position is up here. There's a pair of ironclads that'll be defending Pittsburgh Landing and a number of entrenchments. And ultimately the objective for the Confederacy over the course of the 2 days is to displace the Union and push them across Pittsburgh Landing. Historically, the intent had been to push them away from the river and into swamplands, which we'll see later on the far left of the battlefield. But the course of the day's fighting took the Union towards the river, towards their reinforcements, towards their supplies, and towards the gunboats. And this is just walking through the various parts of the battlefield. Here's Pittsburgh Landing again, where the climactic fight will occur, and where the Union defense will ultimately be anchored. First part of the battle is our corps, and our job is to take Shiloh Church against Union forces who are going to be entrenched in this position across the river. So we do this trick here. I think I've talked about it in previous videos. You pull off all your forces, and then you have a little more control over what comes in. And I do this by division, and I try and think of a couple of different task groups. And so it's important to consider both the weapons, the relative level of experience, and what you're going to have those troops do. Are they going to be firing in the flanks where they need to be accurate? Are they going to be standing and trading blows? Are they going to be charging and being in melee? And then you also need to experience or think about the overall flow of the battlefield and what you're trying to do. So when I take a look at my corps in Shiloh, what I'd like to do is fix the Union with my newer troops at one point, and I have this battle group off to the left there with 2 infantry and some skirmishers and some cav, and they're going to push across on my left, Union right, displace what forces are there defending across the river, and then use that as an anchor point to then push up a support, kind of a bounding leap with the central force that I'm assembling on the right there, 4 or 5 infantry and an artillery along with the general and the supplies. Eventually, the remainder of my corps will come in, but that's what I have to work with to start. And so initially we're issuing orders that take our troops out of the woods as much as possible. Now on the far left here, that's kind of impossible to completely get out of the woods, but we're doing the best we can. And I've spoken before, you don't want your troops to be marching through the woods if you can avoid it. Light troops, it's less of a problem. Cavalry, less of a problem. Those forces can maneuver without too much of an issue. Secondly, when you're engaging in offensive operations, this is the first battle that we've really done so in this game in a macro sense. And here I am also, again, issuing orders to try and keep our troops on the roads and also to make sure they don't bunch up. So I want them to be using multiple roads and maneuvering to kind of arrive at multiple different vectors with the Union force. And I don't want them bunching up on each other because then they're going to slow each other down. And I want to create this right battle group is going to be the anvil, and my group on the left will be the hammer. So they need to get into position and start pouring fire into the Union within reason ASAP. However, I'm going to be waiting until other forces for the remainder of my corps come in. And this particular battle is an excellent opportunity for us to discuss sort of the basic thesis around an offensive operation. Rule number one is recon. You see, I'm throwing out a net of skirmishers out in front of my forces. A body of troops, especially line infantry, a brigade like this, heavy infantry, maneuvering without reconnaissance is, as far as I'm concerned, infantry maneuvering into an ambush. It's very rare that you're going to see me operating without a net of some degree of skirmishers. Their spotting characteristic in comparison to the line infantry is simply too good, and the value of knowing the position and strength of the enemy is also so good, too good to ignore. And so even though the main block on the right there is predominantly new units armed with 1842s, they're still gonna perform pretty well because I'm able to identify skirmish units and at least push them back or just keep them engaged. Even if nothing else, they're not shooting at the line infantry, and more importantly, they're not shooting at officers, supplies, or artillery because they've been engaged. The enemy will, of course, know about me historically. My corps was, I believe, Polk's corps historically, and it did encounter Union skirmishers, much like my force is doing so now. However, the potential extant threat of Confederate forces advancing on the Union position were not taken as seriously at the time, and the game simulates this by you coming on Federal positions with the troops still in their tents. The units are assumed to be asleep or something. And I've played this battle in a very, very aggressive manner where you take advantage of that and you pay dividends. That strategy of just shock, essentially, nets you a lot of initial casualties, but your troops are tired and they have a hard time kind of carrying forward the attack. So you're seeing a much more considered method of offensive warfare in the playthrough here. You're going to see the Confederate forces occupy covered positions and then either seek to bait Federal troops into an attack, which seems silly, and they're defending the church, or you'll see artillery degrading their position. But the skirmishers are a vital component to this. They're securing and occupying and pushing Federal troops out of what I'm going to be treating as my safe territory. You see that especially on the left. I get reinforcements here. Okay, so on the left here you see the skirmishers have more or less already occupied the sort of semicircle of trees there, with my heavy troops moving up, but that whole portion of the map now I know is safe. And we're going to push our fresh troops to support the attack as well. And ultimately the idea here is I know, having played this battle before, that we will eventually shift our focus to the right, and that'll be in the other video, the second video. But eventually you'll have access to the entire battlefield later in the first day, and then of course in the second day as well. And the majority of the fighting occurs there. So my left wing is going to turn into an extreme left wing before too long. So now the line infantry is mostly in place. And we're waiting for the artillery to come online, we're waiting for the artillery to come unpacked, we're also waiting for the reinforcing units to get into position as well. And also for the left wing to get into position right at the cusp of those woods there before they can cross the open river and the open terrain. That's dangerous ground, and I want to do that in as protected a manner as possible. So 7th Infantry might have engaged those units there in the caps on the far right, and I didn't want them. to do so. I wanted them to not be seen if I could avoid it. I think now the AI is aware of my existence, however, and sort of them responding to me being here is unfortunately kind of unavoidable. But the troops, having walked in the woods, are going to need time to kind of rest up. My corps at this point in time is still generally in pretty good condition. The Union has been kind of probing my lines, but they're doing so over open territory, and I'm firing from cover. Skirmishers are being used essentially to maintain the coherency of the front, not as combat units. They're not intended to do a lot of the fighting, but they're making sure that nothing slips through. And so some of the Union positions, or Federal position troops, leave their tents and cross the river, which makes perfect sense. That they're trying to collapse or concentrate their forces as well. And we have a good visibility of what's available. So that we can currently see 3 infantry brigades, 1 cavalry brigade, looks like a 4th maybe, and then clearly there's artillery, at least 1 battery. And you look at the top of the screen there's sort of an there's a U shape. And essentially what's going to happen is we're going to push the Union into that position, into that U shape, and they're not going to be free to operate outside of it. And that's going to give us control of, take a look at this map here, nearly all of that map. And doing so, it gives the Confederacy a good chance to prepare for the later phases of the battle. And so now we're pushing our left wing up with our anvil in position. The hammer is coming up, but the Federals have decided they want to go ahead and attack. And so when the enemy attacks, you retreat, as we've done so on the far right, and we've blunted their attack and just savaged them with a lot of really early free casualties, and we're doing so in the center as well. Meanwhile, while they're attacking on our right, we're attacking on, I guess, their right, our left. And so now I'm running them, which I don't, again, advise doing, but this particular position is rather precarious. They're crossing a river and crossing open terrain, so they need to make it over into the line of trees as soon as possible, and I'm bringing up supporting troops as well to sort of follow on the attack. And so if the first thesis of attack is recon, the second thesis of attack is strength and disruption, and ensuring that when you do hit, you hit with enough force to push through, but that you keep the enemy guessing as to where eventually you'll hit. And then the third point that I want to line or show here, and this is why I have those troops coming up behind the left hook, so to speak, is support. So you need to hit hard enough to make the attack stick, but then those troops that go in the first wave or the first part of the attack might be spent, might be tired, the enemy is going to counterattack. You need to have forces coming in behind them in order to support that attack and make sure that the momentum of the offensive is not lost, or alternatively, what ground you have purchased is not also lost, either in the course of the counterattack or in the course of just simply being exhausted from taking it in the first place. So you sufficiently reconnoiter what you want to take. So I want to take the left copse of trees there, and you ensure you have the forces to do it. So 2 infantry brigades, sniper skirmishers, and 2 cavalry in support. You push in with overwhelming force and shocking speed at the same time, and then once those troops have accomplished their offensive objective, and you usually want to keep those goals pretty conservative, you then bring in supporting troops to sort of relieve them of the position, or they're going to run the risk of being overrun in a counterattack. And if there is a counterattack, that's the time when you attack elsewhere. So there you see that the overall ebb and flow or thrust of the battlefield, the Confederates are in position on the left, but the position's rather precarious. There's only 2 infantry brigades over there and a light skirmish unit. And if the Union decides that they want to go ahead and put the weight of their forces there it would not be very hard for them to dislodge me. So this is the time when it's perfect for the rest of the army to push up. And so the center force begins an advance across basically the entire line, a general attack, in order to take the pressure off the forces on the left there. And I'm debating what I'm going to do with the cavalry. Cavalry in this game is so fragile that you just need to be very careful about when you commit them, and when you do, you can accomplish great things, but you need to be careful about when you do. So the Confederate forces on my right have successfully taken this sort of upside down U shape, and now we're pushing into the center. And the center is going to be a bit more contested than either of the wings, and that's a mistake as well. So it creates kind of a salient for the Federals if they want to keep pushing in the middle, where I'll be able to either pinch it or keep firing at it from both flanks at the same time. And I'm treating this copse of woods that looks like 4th Infantry is moving into as kind of a bunker. And so you're seeing, again, the same theory that I had at Bull Run, where you treat the battlefield like the First World War. You're looking for trenches and fortifications and trenches and fortifications. So my left hook, the people in that line of trees there, everything behind them, the enemy either can't see or can't get to. So I can move troops up safely, and they create kind of a safe place for my units to move to before they either strike out from that position or reposition elsewhere. And I'm doing the same thing with the upside down U, and now I'm doing the same thing with that block of woods in the middle there. And eventually I'm going to push troops into that block of woods where the church is, and I'm also going to push troops to that block of woods in the far, far, far right, essentially leaving the Federals the upside down, or actually the U shape, as the only place they can safely operate. They're going to be bunched up, and I'll be able to control the flow of the battlefield. They won't be able to leave that spot because I'll be able to hit them from every possible direction and prevent them from just achieving any kind of momentum. Now that's a combination of accurate, well-trained Confederate infantry, good recon, good positioning, so forth and so on, but also just using the terrain, using the advantages that the terrain can give you, deciding when and where is a good time to kind of achieve that strike. The second phase of the battle on the Confederate far right or the Union left is going to be a lot messier. There's not nearly as much clear, I think, kind of obvious terrain as to where's a good place to be. So in this position there's not enough cover for me to advance, so I just sort of snipe at the Federals to prevent them from drawing more and more forces to the center until my artillery gets into position and my position becomes more stabilized. So at this point in time, artillery is in position, you've got double layer reinforcements and troops resting in cover with more and more artillery and more artillery infantry waiting on the other side of the river from the Confederate position. So what was at the beginning of this battle the Union's position is now my position, and at every opportunity seek to turn the battle into a defensive one. The armaments of this particular era and the ways that this game kind of works and functions, the advantage lies in the hands of the defender, and so at every opportunity, even on the offense, I am seeking to turn a battle into a defensive affair. I am seeking to make the enemy come to me, but either having so much artillery that it's foolhardy for them not to, or to seek, a piece of terrain that they need to take. So I'm shattering some Union infantry cavalry on my right. Actually, not shattering, just hurting. And they're attempting to find a place with which to attack me, but to do so they have to come at me over open terrain. So this is supposed to be a battle where the Confederates are on the attack, and eventually I will be, but right now the Confederates are on the defensive, and the Union feels obliged to come at me. So now I've pushed skirmishers up into these copse of woods north of the church. And I'm sort of seeing, like, is it tenable for me to push infantry up? Have we degraded? Look at, they are coming out of that copse of woods like a swarming hornet's nest. And that's exactly why I don't push up into that. They feel obliged to come to me again. The AI seems to have just this burning hatred of skirmishers. I can't quite figure out why. But I bait them into coming out, and the howitzers and the rest of the artillery have a field day, and they walk into the range of my rifled, musket-armed infantry and just get slammed. Even on the right, my right, where Confederate units have smoothbores. The 1842 is an effective medium range weapon. It's fine at medium ranges, and it's doing good work against that cavalry that keeps on coming at me. It's doing good work against the artillery battery, and when I eventually push up from the right, it will do good work in the close quarters fighting that you tend to see in woods, or in the very small distances between where I'm going to be and the cavalry or artillery who will be defending against my attack. And I'll do so, again, with rested troops in force. So eventually all three of those brigades there that are currently occupying my right are going to displace. And they're going to push up into the copse of woods in the far right where that artillery is. So this is me getting a little cocky. I push the cavalry up and I have them occupy the town there, and then this is me being stupid. So what have I been doing this whole battle? I've been baiting the Federals into occupying that ranch or farm, and then blasting them with an infantry brigade, and the Union does the exact same thing to me. And I don't know what I was thinking when this is going down, but it goes exactly the same for me as it did for them. So now the Union has decided they want to occupy these woods, which is perfect as far as I'm concerned, because I can just keep blasting away at them. And I've got enough guns coming at them from enough different directions that even though they're in cover, it's still, lethal. It's still the kind of position they don't want to maintain. And I'm checking the victory conditions. What do I actually need to hold? I just need to take less casualties than they do, and I need to hold Pittsburgh Landing. So the rest of this stuff is just window dressing. The rest of this stuff is just kind of bragging rights. And we're now checking out the second part of the battle. And I'm not a fan of the way that it just sort of disjoints the battlefield like this, but it sort of creates two micro battles. When you look at this, we're not very far apart, and we should be able to support each other. And then later on you can. Later on in the battle you can. So there's a lot of waiting here, where I'm waiting to get all of my forces. So the game gives me, I want to say, two pretty decent divisions of infantry. And some supporting artillery and all that kind of thing. But I don't want to just kind of walk into the Federal position piecemeal. That just seems like a really bad idea. And then we take Jenkins's cavalry and push them just way all the way out to my right. And I'm using them as kind of a flanker, as a recon element, and more importantly as a spoiling element. If I can sneak them, they're treating the dismounted cavalry, as I usually do, is kind of a weird special forces unit. I'm going to push them into weird positions and kind of make the enemy busy or confused. So I'm just checking the stats on the free units. They're all pretty decent. They're not bad. They're all, relatively experienced, especially considering how big the brigades are, and they've all got decent weapons. Springfield 1842, like I said, decent medium range weapon, and the fact of the matter is the fighting on the right here is going to be mostly pretty close order fights. So now I'm just arranging my things and sending a net of skirmishers out front. Again, it's the same thing as the last video. Recon, 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 and then, move in force. Find the enemy, fix the enemy, and then move in force. And I'm waiting here for the other units I'm going to get. So I'll get units to come in from the center of the battlefield, and it's going to be what the game calls the Reserve Corps, and I'm sure historically that's based in history. And then at that point in time, I'll have something to the effect of like 9 infantry or maybe 10 brigades that I can maneuver with on the far right, and that's great because it's very easy in this particular position to get outmaneuvered or have your troops get exhausted. So now I'm just kind of running the game at fast forward because I'm just waiting for follow-on troops. I'm waiting for more guys to show up. And here they are. And so now it's all about getting these guys into position. And unfortunately, despite my usual, reticence to maneuver infantry through woods, I don't really have a choice. Like, they appear in the woods. And so we just get them into position. And the enemy has plenty of chance to rest as well, but they would anyway. And when I finally do engage, I'm going to do so with all 9 of my corps at once, or not corps, 9 of my divisions, brigades at once. Alright, getting them all kind of the way that I want them. Alright, so Jenkins is where I want him to be. Jenkins is in a position now where he's in the far right, and I've unfortunately given the existence of my artillery away. So I would ideally like it if the AI didn't know I was even there. I would like it if all of a sudden, as far as the AI is concerned, 9 brigades of infantry appear, on a pretty wide front, supported by artillery and skirmishers and cavalry coming out of the enemy's complete rear, and then be able to take either one or both flags. In this particular fight, neither flag actually matters. So I saw the victory window earlier, and the window said that all I had to hold was Pittsburgh Landing. So these 2 flags don't actually matter. But I think finding, fixing, and fighting the enemy is worthwhile. I mean, ultimately, especially as the Confederates, if you don't keep the Union manpower number in check, it's very easy to ultimately be facing just, unbeatably large armies. So that's a resource you have to manage, is that kind of attrition as a resource is a figure you need to be thinking about. So we've engaged the Federals forward of the defensive works, and now I'm moving the left wing, which will eventually become my center, into position. And I'm bringing skirmishers up so they can kind of figure out where the guys are. And the battle begins in earnest. So with recon, we've determined that there are 3 rookie brigade, 1 experienced brigade and 2 rookie brigades, kind of exposed, just out in the woods by themselves, unsupported otherwise. Patrolling around or hanging out, I don't know, in the woods, and I guess they're there, and that's fine. But I've used skirmishers to get their attention. Skirmishers in woods especially, like, that's where they operate. That's where they make their money. And so I'm maneuvering the reserve corps now to surround the federal position and push them back. I would dream against the idea of shattering these brigades, but that they're too large, it's too fresh, the battle's too far, or too much just begun, and there's very low odds that I'm going to be able to inflict the crippling kind of casualties you need to be doing if you're going to get a unit to shatter or surrender. But their position's already untenable. They are surrounded. Yes, they're in cover, but we're also in cover, so with both units being in cover, ultimately it becomes a non-factor. If both sides are in cover, it doesn't really matter. But I have more maneuver elements than they do, and wow, based on the performance here, it looks like my units are better in melee than theirs are, and that could just be an experience gap, it could just be a weapons gap, maybe. It could be that the Confederates, stat-wise, are just better at melee. I'm not really sure, but that's unexpected, I think is the word that I would use. All right, so I get a little excited about all the fighting going on here, and I lose sight of the momentum that I keep on talking about. I keep on harping about maintaining your momentum, and when you have the opportunity, use it, and when the enemy is attacking you in one place, attack them somewhere else. And I have neglected the fact that my left flank is in a perfect position to attack. So they've engaged me with now 4 brigades in the center. It's a fight they're losing, and that means they've got 1 or 2 to defend against eventually 6 that I'll throw against their flag position. And you notice I turn the infantry brigade not to fire. It's because I want to get them in a covered position. So the AI will often have its brigades or corps regiments shoot as soon as they possibly can. As soon as they're in range and they have a viable target, they'll just shoot. And sometimes it's advantageous to hold your fire until you're in a better place to get a good shot. So in this particular instance, I wanted to wait until they were in cover, but you can often see me doing this where I want to wait until they're in a good flank, or I want to wait until they're in an optimum distance. 1842s are really very effective at very close ranges, but not so effective outside of that. I don't know what the AI was thinking. The Federals charged a supported brigade over the open, took a volley in open terrain, and then engaged in melee against an opponent that was just standing there. And then this situation in my right kind of turns into a bit of a quagmire. So I'm trying to utilize the sort of given troops here, so that position by the flag is like I say, oh, it's covered, so I can advance into it. But there's 2 or 3 batteries of artillery. There's 2+ brigades of infantry defending, firing from multiple different angles. It's not a good way to attack that position and expect to be able to hold, but it's also an opportunity to grind at the cannons. And if I push up with my extreme left, I can outflank it. So even though I'm firing into woods from the open, I'm doing so in a unit's flank, and that preserves my center's ability to keep fighting. And so you see that here. You see the Chalmers Brigade and Gilwin not breaking the infantry that's there, and then they have the opportunity to just pour fire into artillery batteries, which is perfect, which is exactly what you want to see. And there's a grinding melee in my center, and I'm ultimately trying to take that position. So now we come back over to the left. This is what I talk about when I say the battlefield's a bit disjointed. So now we're taking a look at the left. Here the Union will kind of launch an attack. So they get reinforcements, and then more troops come at me. But at this point in time, my position is so secure, it's very hard to imagine a successful Union attack coming at me from any direction. To come at any of the Confederate positions along the map here, they'd have to do so over open terrain, they'd have to do so while taking artillery fire, they'd have to do so into supported infantry units that can offer layered fire from a number of different directions. Now I can just sit here and let them come at me, but again, a lot of what this is about inflicting casualties. It's about managing as a kind of resource, keeping the federal manpower pool to a minimum, and I can't do that if I don't get kills. And if I don't get kills here or in other major battles, it's very easy to imagine that the federal manpower pool gets so unmanageably large that even though I'm using sound fundamentals of military strategy and I'm borrowing heavily from other YouTubers that I have followed the work of, even if the Confederates outfight them at every opportunity, it's not going to make a difference, because they're just going to have 150,000 men or something to fight with me at Gettysburg. Force protection matters, absolutely, but degrading your opponent is sometimes more important, especially on a macro scale. A war of attrition doesn't work if you don't attrit your enemy. So here's what I'm talking about my right. So I've pushed up 3 skirmisher units to sort of take a look at, is this terrain the kind of terrain that I could move line infantry to? And it's clear that I can. There was one unit of cavalry kind of defending the copse of woods. So we'll push more infantry up, and here I am keeping that supply cart moving. And you can see that they're in their little bunker. They're in their little U-shaped block of woods that they won't be able to maneuver out of safely. And every time they try and come out, they just get slammed when they try and do so. So there's a brigade moving into the houses. They're just going to get reamed. And there's another brigade coming at me. They're going to get reamed. I mean, anytime they try and come out of the woods there, they're just going to get wrecked. So the skirmishers here are keeping that artillery on us. The skirmishers are keeping the cavalry away. I'm using the skirmishers as kind of like strategically, I'm kind of using them in the same way that the Americans used paratroopers in the Second World War. Is they're light troops intended to hold a block of terrain while heavier forces can come in to support it. So the skirmishers wouldn't be able to hold it by themselves, much like the paratroopers wouldn't be able to hold whatever they'd taken, absent heavier support and armor and whatever from the regular army. But them being there and being able to move so quickly allows me to move the heavier infantry into position more safely without just blindly stumbling into that position. And so I'm slowly but surely kind of shifting my army or my line to the right, because I see an avenue to attack the Union position, to outmaneuver the Federal position. I can't attack it straight on with my left wing. I can't just walk across an open field. It's begging for casualties I don't need to suffer. But what I can do is I can turn this block of woods right here into a fort, so to speak. And I can punish the Federals for coming near it, and I can use it as a position or place from which to launch attacks. And with the Federals so concerned about Shiloh Church, they're going to be concerned about my forces to their front or my forces to the south of their position, and that gives me the opportunity to come at them from a different angle. And it just also helps that locally I do outnumber the enemy. large cavalry, dismounted, operating in the same manner as skirmishers. Is this terrain viable? Can I move into it? Is somebody else there? It's recon. And now this copse of woods is mine. Unless the Federals feel like committing a lot of resources to this block of woods, that block of woods is mine. Skirmishers are probing. Is this a block of woods we can move into? Can I move my line up? And I want to. I want to move my line up. I know there are a lot of Federals on the other side of the woods there, and so, I mean, the prudent course of action would be to wait. We have the strong terrain. There's no great reason, short of seeking battle, to move into those woods. But I want the kill count on this fight to be large. And it is. When we get to the end of Shiloh, it's a large casualty that suffered for the Union. A lot of batteries knocked out, a lot of brigades knocked out, a lot of brigades severely degraded. Not that is a statistic that unfortunately manages to go across multiple battles. There's one brigade there to the on the Confederate left that is already being engaged by skirmishers from a number of different sides, and now it's being engaged by heavy infantry from its right. And I'll be able to claim essentially the sort of lower lip of that Federal position, but this is where we're going to call it on the first video. The next video, we're going to take the Hornet's Nest and chase the Federals back to Pittsburgh Landing, and then we'll also probably handle the second day of Shiloh, which is the battle around Pittsburgh Landing. Thank you for watching, however. This has been Fiasco. You're watching Ultimate General Civil War from the Confederates' perspective. We're fighting the first battle, or the only battle, the first day of Shiloh. Thanks again.